Well, it's good to be back, Spring Lake Village. Hope you're doing well. So, I wanted to devote the last 2 weeks in November to just a short lecture series. And I chose this because we've all been enduring so many stressors the last several months. So, I wanted to pick a topic that was kind of intriguing and kind of escapist from what we've had to endure. And originally, it was going to be part of a longer series on the Ottoman Empire, but I decided to devote a 2 week lecture series to this interesting topic, namely the harem or harems of the Ottoman Empire. In the West, harem was referred to as a seraglio, as in Mozart's abduction of the seraglio. So I hope you'll spend the next 40 minutes with me. And at the very end, I want to provide you with a YouTube link that will allow you to watch a very fine documentary on the mysteries of the harem. So just stay with me to the very end of the lecture and I'll provide you with that link. If you can't, just remember if you were to go to the Google browser and type in the hidden world of the harem, YouTube, it should come up. It's one of them is like 48 minutes. That's the link I'm going to give you, but there's another one that's a more expanded version, about an hour and a half. So let's begin then with part one of this new series, In a Forbidden Place, Everyday Life in the Sultan's Seraglio. So this week we'll discuss the rise of the harem, how this was an important institution in Islamic life. We'll discuss who lived in the harem and the important role it played in Ottoman society. And then next week, we'll discuss the remarkable power and influence of the women of the harem, how they very much, especially in the 16th and 17th century, played a very important role in the destiny of the Ottoman court. So let's then begin then with our first lecture in this series. So although there are harems not only in the Near East, Middle East, as well as in the Far East, this lecture series will be devoted to the rise of the harems in the Ottoman Empire. Now, we have discussed the Ottoman Empire in the past, and it may be the subject of a longer lecture series in the not too distant future, but the Ottoman Empire was one of the most successful and longest lasting dynasties in world history. It lasted over 600 years, from roughly the middle of the 14th century, actually early 14th century, to its collapse after World War I. So from roughly, let's say, 1305 until 1919, 1920. It was a superpower and the great threat of Christendom during the Middle Ages and beyond, a major superpower that really threatened the stability of the West for a number of centuries. So it was an empire created by Turkish tribes in what is present-day Turkey, formerly Anatolia or Asia Minor, that grew to be, as I mentioned, one of the great powers, especially during the 15th and 16th century. At its height, it included Southeastern Europe, all the way to the gates of Vienna. It included Hungary, Greece, parts of the Ukraine, Iraq, North Africa, the Levant region, as I mentioned, Anatolia. Its apogee was during the reign of the most famous sultan. That was the title given to the temporal ruler as well as religious ruler of the Ottomans, the most famous and the emperor known throughout the West as the great lawgiver Suleiman the Magnificent, who reigned during the 16th century from roughly 1520 to 1566. His reign marks the apogee, the great heyday of the Ottoman Empire, during which the Ottoman world expanded markedly to all throughout North Africa and really expanded its suzerainty all the way to the very heart of Europe, to the very gates of the Habsburg Empire that included Austria as well as Hungary. It was the last great flowering of Islam in the West, but to the east, you had the Safavid Empire, and the Ottoman army was successful in overwhelming the Safavids of Iran. It had a brilliant navy, the Ottomans did, that allowed it to threaten the navies of the European powers, and with its navy, it was able to take control of many of the great ports of North Africa. So during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, a great golden age emerged throughout the Ottoman world. So in architecture, in science, the capital of the Ottoman Empire, Istanbul, the former city of Constantinople, the new Rome established by Constantine the Great in the first quarter of the 4th century, was subsumed by the Ottomans in the early 14th century, and they made Constantinople this great city that straddled the east and the west on the Straits of the Bosphorus, the glorious capital of this new empire. And it was noted for its trade, for its culture, for its achievements in science and in the arts, calligraphy, miniature painting, etc. And it all came together, especially during the epic reign of this man that you see here to the right, very much admired in the West, Suleiman the Magnificent. Here's a map of the Ottoman Empire, this sort of beige color area. These are the territories that were conquered during the reign of Suleiman. So, as I mentioned, during its heyday, the Ottoman Empire stretched from Western North Africa all the way to the Persian Gulf. The old Mamluk dynasty here of Egypt, the regions, of course, of Mecca and Medina, the sultans and the caliphs. I should mention, too, that the Ottoman emperors were not only sultans, which designated their temporal authority over their empire, but as caliphs or caliphs, they were the legitimate heirs of the Prophet Muhammad and guardians of the Islamic faith and Sharia law, which was Islamic jurisprudence that governed not only Islamic religious life, but every aspect of Islamic life, social life, political life, etc. And the caliphs or caliphs were the guardians of Islamic law. So you can see here the extent of the Ottoman Empire, this vast territory, again, a major threat to European Christendom. So the Ottoman sultans and caliphs ruled this vast empire from Istanbul, former Constantinople, from their vast, sprawling palace complex called Topkapi. That was the palace complex in which was the centralized government called the Sublime Porte. And from here, the sultans slash caliphs ruled over their vast empire. So Topkapi complex overlooked the uh, Golden Horn and the Bosphorus Strait. It had this commanding position, and Topkapi occupies the old Byzantine palaces. So the Byzantine Empire, of course, ruled from the early 4th century AD until its capture by the Ottomans in 1453. And it's within the Topkapi complex that you find the Harem or harem. Now, a harem was not only a physical place, but the word harem itself in the Old Arabic referred to a place that was secluded, a place that was prohibited, a place that was sacrosanct from outsiders. The actual word harem means a forbidden place, and it originally sort of referred to the holy cities of Medina and Mecca that were forbidden to outsiders, namely those who were not Muslim. But later it would refer to an actual place within a Muslim household that was relegated primarily to females. But as we'll see in the Ottoman harem, that is the harem of Topkapi Palace, it also included other members of the imperial household. But within an Islamic household, you had two separate quarters. One was reserved for male members, an area where other men would be invited and entertained, and that was the Salamik, Selamik, and that was separate from the Haremlik, or the harem, where women dwelled and other members of the imperial household would dwell, including wives, concubines, female slaves, the mother of the sultan, daughters, as well as royal princes up to the age of 12. So this harem or harem really fascinated the West. And in the West, it was called the Seraglio. And it really fascinated writers and artists, especially during the age of Romanticism. Many artists of this age in Europe painted fanciful scenes of the going-ons of the harem as sort of these places of licentiousness, of decadence, of these beautiful women parading around in these opulent surroundings. It became the subject of songs and operas, the most famous being that of Mozart, called the Abduction from the Seraglio, which tells the story of two kidnapped young women who are freed from the Sultan's palace. And as I mentioned, many artists of the Romantic period also depicted the goings on of harem life. This is a photograph taken from a boat on the Bosphorus. And you can see in front of you is the sprawling complex of Topkapi Palace, which was located on the Western European side of Istanbul. And this occupied, again, the former palaces and many of the great churches of the Byzantine era, of which there are just few remains. This is part of the great fortification walls that protected the great city of Constantinople, virtually impregnable for nearly 1,000 years until Ottoman forces were successful in penetrating it in 1453. So the harem of Topkapi Palace occupied a very centralized position within the palace complex, whereas many women's quarters in other Islamic households, palaces, would normally be located at the far end of the household, sort of relegated to the back. The harem of Topkapi occupied a very centralized position, showing how the kind of influence and power it wielded. So it was located very close to the council of Topkapi Palace, meaning that many of the important women of the harem could associate or mingle with males of the Ottoman state bureaucracy. So it's not by accident that the harem at Topkapi deliberately occupied a very important place within the Topkapi complex. So here you can see an overview of the harem and the various courtyards. And then and here's the vast sprawling complex of Topkapi, and here is where the harem was located. I should mention that a Topkapi palace complex consisted of well over 400 rooms, and it was kind of a world unto itself. It included not only the imperial apartments of the members of the Sultan's family, but also the offices of the state bureaucracy, the pavilions, the audience halls, the official courts, also the kitchens, the laundries, which were located here. There were, as I mentioned, over 400 rooms, and it was begun in the middle of the 15th century all the way until the middle of the 19th century, when a new palace on the Bosphorus was constructed, a more European style palace, more in line with the great palaces of Europe, called the Dolmabahce Palace. So although Topkapi was still utilized for the state bureaucracy, the imperial family around 1853 would move to the Dolmabahce Palace, which was located right on the Bosphorus Sea. Now, the harem was designed in accordance with the religious law of Islam, again, Sharia law, which governed every aspect of Islamic life. And under Sharia law, there were very strict laws of how women had to be closely watched in public places. They were, as you know, required to be veiled, and veiling actually was not an invention of Islam, but actually there is a lot of historical evidence that strongly indicates that veiling actually originated during the Byzantine era. Um, but in the harem, women did not have to be veiled in this secluded place, in this place outside public view. Here they were freed to do as they enjoyed in the presence of other women. Now, although women made up the majority of those who occupied the harem, there were also slaves. There were that also members of the imperial family, namely the mother of the sultan, his legal wife, concubines, servants, but also the princes, the shahzades of the sultan, the royal children, the daughters, and the eunuchs. And we're going to discuss now the hierarchy within. So there was a very highly sophisticated system of organization, kind of akin to what we find in a corporation, highly organized, highly systemized system that existed within the harem. Now, the harem was the ultimate symbol of the sultan's power. His ownership of women, who were overwhelmingly slave women, was a sign of his wealth, of his power, as well as his sexual appetite or prowess. As I mentioned, the system itself had been introduced in Turkish society with the adoption of Islam under the influence of the Caliphate, which the Ottomans emulated. To ensure the obedience of the women, many were brought and kept into slaveries. However, not all members of the harem were slaves. The main wives, especially those taken into marriage to consolidate personal and dynastic alliances, were for the most part free women. The relationship between slavery and polygamy in the Turkish harem would actually continue all the way until the early 20th century. So even in the early 20th century, a Muslim male could have up to 4 wives. So in the Ottoman tradition, both legal marriage wives and slave concubines or mistresses were relied upon for the purpose, for the sole purpose of reproduction, okay, to produce ideally male heirs. The primary emphasis was on the patriarchal nature of power that was hereditary only through sons. So as I just mentioned, like a fine-tuned corporation, if you will, streamlined to allow for leadership and subordinate roles within a corporate entity, the harems had a highly specialized, strict hierarchy that included a seniority system that allowed them to function in the most efficient and productive manner. Now, at the very top of the hierarchy was the mother of the sultan, known as the Valide Sultan. Here's a European painting, a lot of these Valide sultans became extremely powerful during the so-called Sultanate of Women, which we'll discuss at length next week. But a lot of them commissioned European artists to paint them in their finery and all their regalia to show how powerful they were. They were kind of like the queen bee. Everybody was under the rule, really, of the Valide Sultan. You wanted to be on her best side. You did not want to enrage the Valide Sultan. And she sort of oversaw everything that took place in the harem. But under her, she had a number of functionaries who served at her pleasure. And in addition to this, she had to make sure that the Shahzade, or the sons of the Sultan, were being properly educated in the protocol of the Ottoman court, known as the Sublime Porte. They had to understand the art of realpolitik. And she also had the role of selecting the most beautiful women of the court who would bed with the heir of the Sultan. And the second most important female within this sort of hierarchy was the Haseki Sultan. Now, she was the legal wife of the Sultan. He could have other wives, but she was the most important, the preeminent wife. She was the chief consort who would appear alongside the Sultan at important state functions or on diplomatic missions, etc. Just once again, although I'm talking right now about the Haseki Sultan, I should also mention again about the power of the Valida Sultan. She even had the power over life and death, and the comings and goings of the women of the court. She had almost absolute authority. Among the most important women of the court were the Jarias. A lot of these women, I should say most of these women, had been captured. They were slave women, some of the most beautiful women of the court. Some of them were of Slavic origin, some of them were of Greek origin, as part of the so-called def shirme system. These were individuals who were captured by the Ottoman armies, not only women, but men as well, who would make up the elite corps known as the Janissaries. Many of the captured males, whether they were from the Balkans or they were Slavs or they were Greeks, sometimes occupied some of the most important positions of the state bureaucracy. Many of them were among the most powerful within the Ottoman court. But the Jariyas, these were beautiful ladies in waiting who served members of the Ottoman court. We also have the Kadims, Kadins. So these were also favorite women of the sultans who possessed extraordinary beauty, often promoted to become the wives of the sultan under the Haseki Sultan. Like the Jariyas, many of them were slaves or kidnap victims. So upon promoting a woman to Kadin, the sultans were actually making them their wives, who were provided with their own private quarters, beautiful clothing, jewelry, a lavish expense account, etc. Also within this hierarchy were the Koreas, who were servants to the Sultan's mother, the Valide, as well as the Kadins and the children of the Sultan. So they were kind of functionaries under these important individuals. And then you had the Kaifas, also ladies of the court, who were very important attendants in the service of the Sublime Porte at Topkapi. There are many fanciful images of life in the harem. So this was painted by one of the artists of the Romantic period. Now, there are accounts of Westerners traveling to Constantinople. Of course, they would not have been allowed into the sanctum sanctorum of the harem, but they did have firsthand accounts from women of the harem of what the harem looked like. So some of these, although wildly fanciful works of the imagination, give you some idea of the beauty of the opulence of the court. This actually is a sort of faithful depiction of one of the apartments with this divan here in the corner of this royal apartment. And here you see a eunuch, about which we'll discuss in just a moment. And here is the so-called courtyard of the favorites of the Kadime, possibly that's the name given by historians and those who've studied the harem at great length. I should mention, over the last 20 years, the harem at Topkapi has been beautifully restored to its former glory, and work is still ongoing. I don't know how many of you have had an opportunity to visit the famous quarters of the harem, but it's really quite something. You could just see how dazzling and opulent it must have been during its heyday. So except for the Sultan and the royal princes of the court, no man could look upon the women in this highly intimate sanctum sanctorum of Topkapi, with the exception of the extremely powerful eunuchs who wielded immense power. They were the great guardians of the harem, guarded the gates to the harem and protected the women. They were the great doorkeepers. Nobody could enter the harem really except through them. For the most part, they were slaves who had been taken captive during campaigns in the Nile region, especially the southern region of the Nile, the Ethiopian area, and the area of the Sudan. But there were also eunuchs taken from the Caucasus. So there were actually two groupings of eunuchs. We have the black eunuchs, very dark skin, or the Sandali, who within the hierarchy were at the top. And then the white-skinned eunuchs, again, they were from the Caucasus, but also a number of them were from the Balkans, primarily Slavs from the area around former Yugoslavia. And again, brought in as part of this forcible recruiting institution called the Def Shirme system. The chief eunuch was called the Kizlar Arwase, or the master of the girls. And there are interesting images, not only paintings like you see here of the famous eunuchs of the court, but but this institution existed well into the 19th and early 20th century. So we actually have not only these fanciful images, so you see here an image of a eunuch, but we also have photography. So there's a number of really remarkable black and white photographs of these important, all-powerful eunuchs. Here you see one standing beside the door of the Harem of Topkapi Palace. So again, the eunuchs rendered sexless were considered the ideal guards to watch over beautiful women. Even if their carnal desires were kind of intact, they really had no ability to act upon them. During the great heyday of the Ottoman Empire, especially in the 16th century, there were about 1,000 eunuchs who were in the service of the harem. Sometimes they were sent as gifts. So I mentioned, for the most part, a lot of them were captive slaves, but sometimes they were sent as gifts to the sultans who would utilize them as they saw fit. So there were, like harem women, this hierarchy that existed. And again, the chief was the so-called black eunuch, the chief black eunuch, the Kapi Rase, who was in charge maybe of upwards of 300 black eunuchs and maybe upwards of 700 white eunuchs within the so-called inner circle of the palace bureaucracy. And they not only were the guardians, the gatekeepers, they also controlled sort of the information that flowed within and without and outside the harem, and also within the schools that were located within the harem. So they had enormous power. They were part of the palace intrigue, and we'll discuss next week some of the amazing power and influence they wielded at Topkapi. So also within the harem complex were the so-called odalisks. In Turkish, odalik literally means a chambermaid. So these were also sort of concubines that were available for the sexual pleasure of the sultan. And they were also known as the Iqbals, who had special gifts, singing, could play instruments, recite poetry, etc. So, depending upon your status and wealth, not only the Sultan, but any wealthy Islamic man that had a fabulous household could have odalisks. Now, these women, they were not prostitutes, okay, because prostitution was strictly forbidden under Sharia law. Only the owner of a Muslim household could legitimately have sex with a female slave. Slavery, although it existed, only non-Muslims were slaves. Slavery, Muslims were forbidden to be bought and sold. Now, even the odalisks had their servants, and these were the gediks. Now, they were not women who slept with the sultan or powerful Muslim bureaucrats or princes, but they kind of served, they were kind of the pretty women uh, who you would see at events, at celebrations. They would serve drinks or other delectables or appetizer like baklava, for example, which you should know is not a Greek invention, but rather a Turkish invention. Of course, being Greek, I shouldn't say that, but it's the truth. Baklava is not a Greek word, but rather a Turkish word. And as I mentioned, you have a large number of these enslaved women called jariyas, again, who were actually educated. But within this sort of rarefied world, you know, these women, beautiful women, had to sleep with their overseers, whether it was the Sultan or some other princely Ottoman. So it was non-consensual. So in our eyes today, this would be sort of considered a forcible uh, rape. So many of these women were among the most beautiful uh, within the Ottoman court. As I mentioned, they came from far afield. Most of them were captive slaves. They came from Russia. They came from the Ukraine. They came from as far as Persia, present day Iran. Many came from Greece, from Anatolia. And within the harem, they were educated. Many of them were taught to read and write, to play various instruments, to dance, to recite poetry. They were taught the art of refinement. So, in many ways, it was the education that took place in the harem was sort of akin to a kind of women's finishing school. They also, though, those who were very talented were exposed to literature. Many of them learned French, Italian, history, calligraphy, which was a great art form in the Ottoman Empire. Later on, to become more desirable, they were exposed to much of the culture of the European West. So a lot of them were allowed to read foreign magazines, especially fashion magazines, to be up to date about what was in vogue, and given expense accounts so they could purchase expensive foreign fashion to make themselves very desirable. So many of these women um, became highly educated, learning the arts of refinement, and they were very desirable. So, although they could be desirable to the princes of the court and the Sultan himself, many of them were being educated and cultivated to be married off to the flower, the male upper echelon of male Ottoman society. So they were educated. Many of these women were very talented. And next week, we'll see within this rarefied world the women who made their way up the rank and eventually became all powerful, eventually, in many ways, affecting the destiny of the Ottoman court and the Ottoman world, especially during a remarkable chapter in Ottoman history called by historians today the Sultanate of the Court. And that'll be the subject of the second part of this two-part lecture series. So I hope you sort of enjoyed this introduction to the goings-on of the harem at Topkapi. And as I mentioned at the very start, there's this great documentary. Actually, you can find a few documentaries if you Google. So I encourage you to watch this wonderful documentary called What Happened Inside Suleiman's Harem. Again, that's Suleiman the Magnificent, who ruled from 1520 to 1566, the hidden world of the harem. Now, the link I've given you runs about 50 minutes, but you will find if you do a Google search and type in the hidden world of the harem, there's a longer version that I think runs about an hour and 40 minutes. But again, if you want to watch the one that's just under an hour, copy this. I'll just let you have time to copy it. You have to do it exactly. Otherwise, and then just you can just write this down and then enter it into the Google field, into the browser line, okay? And then it should come up immediately. But if not, if you write it down wrong, again, do a Google search. What happened inside Suleiman's harem, the hidden world of the harem, and then put YouTube, and you'll find it. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Again, it's kind of a little diversion, it's kind of escapist fare. We've been enduring a lot the last several weeks. I'm happy that it's at the time of this recording, it's raining out there. We needed rain. So I look forward to seeing you next week. So take good care of yourselves until we meet again next week.